Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something really, I think, intriguing about adolescence.
Mm.
How young people explain their failures, especially, when it comes to school.
Hmm.
Think back to those middle school years. The whole social scene could be pretty intense, right?
Yeah, definitely.
We've got some fascinating research here that kind of unpacks how these early adolescents navigate those tricky social waters when they don't quite hit the mark academically.
Exactly. And we're not just talking about kids like making stuff up.
No.
We really want to understand the social purpose behind these explanations.
Right. So this deep dive is all about figuring out that social function, especially how teachers and their classmates see these explanations.
Yeah, and we'll be looking at studies done with students in both America and Finland, which gives us this really interesting cross-cultural perspective.
Okay.
And what's particularly surprising, you might find, is the willingness of these young adolescents to sometimes say they failed because, well, they just weren't good at something.
Hmm.
And the social advantages they actually seem to perceive in doing that.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really get what's going on, we need to first appreciate just how much early adolescents, we're talking roughly fourth to eighth grade here, are thinking about their public image.
Absolutely.
It's such a crucial time when fitting in and, being accepted really comes to the forefront.
That's absolutely right. I mean, this is a developmental stage where public image becomes incredibly important. They're highly attuned to saving face, um, navigating potentially embarrassing situations like, yeah, not doing well on a test.
Hmm.
This is all part of forming their identity and finding their place within their social groups. It's huge.
So with that in mind, let's look at some research done with American students. These studies looked at how fourth graders, especially, understand that the reasons they give for their failures, what researchers call attributions, whether they blame it on their own ability, their effort, or something else entirely actually affects how teachers and their friends see them.
And what's fascinating here is how early this understanding develops. I mean, fourth grade.
Yeah.
One study presented students with scenarios about hypothetical classmates who failed an exam. And this design let the researchers really isolate how different explanations impact perceptions.
Yeah, how did they set that up?
Well, these hypothetical students were described in four basic ways: low ability and low effort, low ability but high ability but low effort, and then the student who seemingly has it all, high ability and high effort.
Okay, the classic four types. And then they asked the kids, fourth, sixth, and eighth graders, how much they thought teachers would like each of these hypothetical students.
Right. And also how popular they'd be with their peers.
And the results for teacher liking were pretty consistent across all the grade levels, weren't they?
Yes, totally consistent. Across the board, the students believe that teachers really value effort. So the diligent students, whether they were naturally gifted or not, were seen as more liked by teachers than the ones who were perceived as lazy.
Effort trumps talent in the teacher's eyes.
It seems like it, yeah. Effort really seemed to trump raw talent in the eyes of these hypothetical teachers, according to the students.
But here's where it gets really interesting when we look at peer popularity. What the fourth graders thought was pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, the fourth graders figured, okay, diligent students are also more popular with their classmates. Kind of like how they thought teachers felt. Simple.
But then something shifts, quite dramatically, actually, as the students get older.
Exactly, it completely flips. By eighth grade, these older students actually believed that putting in low effort could boost your popularity with peers.
Get at it here, really.
Yeah, and the student described as capable but lazy, high ability, low effort, went from being one of the least popular in fourth grade to the most popular by eighth grade.
Wow, talk about a dramatic turnaround.
Isn't it? That complete reversal in how capable but lazy students are perceived by their peers as they get older, it really makes you think about the shifting priorities in adolescence.
Totally. So, while teachers consistently value effort, the social currency among peers changes quite a bit as adolescence progresses.
Uh-huh.
Now, the researchers dug a little deeper into this, didn't they? They did another experiment.
They did. They had students imagine they'd failed an important exam themselves, and then they had to explain this failure to both their teachers and their peers, with the goal being, to be liked by both groups.
Ah, okay. So putting them in the hot seat, hypothetically, that's useful for seeing what they'd actually do.
Exactly. This setup let the researchers see if students would strategically choose different explanations depending on who they were talking to.
And did they?
Oh, yeah. That's precisely what they found. The older students, so the sixth and eighth graders, were significantly more likely to tell their peers that they hadn't studied for the exam, that low-effort explanation,
Right.
but they were much less likely to say that to their teachers.
Well, that makes perfect sense, right? You don't want to tell your teacher you didn't even try.
Of course not.
But the findings regarding low ability were also revealing. You mentioned the eighth graders.
Yeah, the eighth graders were more inclined to use a low ability account, saying things like, I'm just really bad at this stuff, compared to the younger students.
Hmm.
And interesting point, across all the grade levels, there was a slight tendency to be more willing to attribute failure to low ability when talking to teachers compared to peers.
Okay, so even the younger ones were doing that a bit with teachers.
A little bit, yeah. So while they might tell their friends they didn't study, when talking to a teacher, the explanation might shift slightly towards, well, a lack of inherent skill.
It really highlights the strategic dance they're doing, tailoring their explanations based on who they're talking to and what kind of reaction they're hoping for.
Absolutely.
Now, this whole idea of willingly portraying oneself as having low ability, it still seems a bit counterintuitive at first glance. Like, why would someone do that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It kind of goes against the general idea that people want to appear competent. But the researchers suggest this comes down to manipulating social reactions. By saying your failure was due to something you can't control, like a lack of inherent ability,
Mm-hmm.
you might be tricked to avoid negative reactions like anger,
Ah,
and instead elicit sympathy, or maybe even offers of help.
okay. So it's like a built-in get-out-of-jail-free card in some social situations.
Hmm.
If you claim low ability, it's harder for someone to be really mad at you for failing.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's seen as a good excuse because it's perceived as uncontrollable.
Like being sick or something.
Exactly. Think about it. If you say you failed because you were sick, that's generally seen as a valid, uncontrollable reason. Attributing failure to low ability functions similarly.
Okay.
And interestingly, compared to other uncontrollable explanations, like, say, blaming bad luck or an unfair teacher, claiming low ability can actually come across as more honest and self-effacing.
How so?
Well, blaming external factors might sound like you're just deflecting responsibility, making excuses.
Yes, teacher hates me. Or the test was impossible.
Right. Whereas saying, I'm just not good at this, almost takes the blame squarely, albeit regretfully, on oneself in a way that doesn't point fingers elsewhere. It can seem more humble.
That makes sense.
Hmm.
Okay, so the research didn't stop with American students. You mentioned Finland.
Right. Building on what we've learned so far, it's fascinating to see how these dynamics play out in a different cultural context. And Finland is often cited as a culture that places a high value on self-effacement, on modesty.
So the thinking was maybe Finnish kids would be even more likely to use these self-effacing explanations.
That was the hypothesis. The researchers thought Finnish students might be even more attuned to the social benefits of appearing self-effacing. So they did a study where Finnish eighth graders chose from various explanations for a hypothetical exam failure, low ability, lack of effort, unfair exam, and bad luck, and said how likely they would be to use each with teachers and peers.
Okay, and what did they find? Did the self-effacing cultural norm in Finland significantly change things?
Well, interestingly, no, not dramatically in the core pattern. Just like their American counterparts, the Finnish eighth graders were most likely to say they failed because of low ability.
Really? Still the top choice.
Still the top choice, yeah. And this was consistent across both teachers and peers.
Oh.
They also showed the same pattern regarding lack of effort, being more willing to tell their peers they didn't study than their teachers.
Wow. So those key patterns held up across cultures.
He did. In terms of these two key attributions, low ability and lack of effort relative to audience, the patterns were quite similar. It does make you wonder if there's a more universal aspect to how adolescents navigate these social situations around failure, maybe regardless of specific cultural values.
That's fascinating. So even in a culture that values humility, the strategic use of the low ability explanation seems to hold up. Now, the Finnish researchers went a step further, didn't they, to understand why this might be the case?
Yes, they did another study where students rated hypothetical peers who used these different failure accounts. They rated them on things like how much teachers would like them, how popular they'd be, but also how self-effacing and honest they seemed.
Adding those character judgments. Clever.
Yeah, they weren't just looking at perceived approval, but also these character judgments. And they found that while the different explanations didn't significantly impact perceived peer popularity, the Finnish students did believe that low-ability accounts would be more likely to earn teacher approval compared to saying they didn't study, the exam was unfair, or they had bad luck.
Okay, so again, teachers are seen as more receptive to the low ability explanation, even in Finland. What about the perceptions of honesty and self-effacement? That seems key for the Finnish context.
Right. Well, lack of effort was actually seen as the most honest explanation by the Finnish students.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But, as you might expect, given the cultural context, the low ability account was considered the most self-effacing.
Okay, so lack of effort, honest, low ability, humble.
Pretty much. So it seems that for a negative outcome like failing an exam, admitting a lack of ability is seen as quite humble in that cultural setting.
But isn't there an interesting point here? If lack of effort is seen as most honest, why lean towards low ability?
That's a really insightful question. Perhaps it's because the social reward of appearing self-effacing and gaining teacher approval outweighs the perception of complete honesty in this specific context. What do you think?
Yeah, that makes sense. It suggests a trade-off. You might sacrifice a bit of perceived honesty to gain social capital in other ways, like seeming appropriately humble and getting the teacher on your side.
Exactly. So if we put it all together, it looks like these early adolescents in Finland might be using the low ability explanation because they think it'll get them in better with teachers. And it also helps them appear appropriately self-effacing, which is socially valued there. It's a pretty clever strategy, really.
It really is. And did they look at relationships? Like, does it matter who the teacher or peer is?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is where the real nuance of their strategic thinking comes into play. The researchers explored how the quality of the relationship, whether they liked or disliked the teacher or peer, influenced these choices. They had Finnish students consider communicating these failure accounts to both liked and disliked teachers and peers.
Okay, and this is where the strategic element really shines through, right? Because you'd imagine you'd tailor your approach even more depending on whether you actually care about that person's opinion.
Precisely. And they found some really clear distinctions. For liked teachers, low ability was the preferred explanation.
Okay.
But if they disliked the teacher, they were more likely to blame the unfair exam.
Huh. Okay, that tracks. It's a kind of passive-aggressive way to express negativity towards someone without direct confrontation.
Exactly. Think about times you've maybe tailored your explanations to different people in your life, perhaps at work with a supportive colleague versus a more critical boss. Do you see any echoes of these adolescent strategies?
Oh, definitely. That's quite telling. What about with peers? How did the liked versus disliked dynamic play out there?
With liked peers, both low ability and lack of effort were more likely explanations. They seemed comfortable using either with friends.
Okay.
But here's a key difference. Low ability was the least likely explanation to be used with disliked peers.
Oh, that's a really interesting distinction. Why would that be? Less likely with disliked peers.
The researchers suggest that when you dislike someone, you have no real incentive to appear self-effacing or to try and elicit their sympathy. There's no relationship benefit to be gained by seeming vulnerable or humble to them.
Right. Why bother?
Exactly. But with liked peers, admitting a shared struggle, yeah, this subject is hard, or a personal limitation, I'm just not great at this part, might actually foster connection. It's a subtle way of building rapport, perhaps by appearing vulnerable or relatable.
So it really underscores that this isn't just about making excuses in a vacuum. It's deeply intertwined with social goals and like maintaining relationships with people they care about.
Exactly. The willingness to portray low ability seems to have multiple social benefits, particularly with people you like. It can help avoid a teacher's anger, potentially elicit sympathy and offers of help, and importantly, make the student appear self-effacing and maybe even honest-ish, which strengthens social bonds with those they value.
It makes you wonder how often this actually happens in classrooms. I mean, are we constantly hearing kids, even the bright ones, say they're just not good at something as a way to navigate these social waters?
Well, the research doesn't give us exact frequency numbers, but it does suggest that it's likely not uncommon. For one thing, remember that what one student considers a failure, only got a B+, can be very different from another's definition.
True.
And also, low ability can be framed very specifically. A student who generally excels in math might say they're just not good at geometry, for example. It's specific enough to serve its social purpose in that moment without undermining their entire academic identity.
That's a good point. It's not necessarily a blanket statement of incompetence, but rather a targeted explanation for a particular situation. Now, let's just circle back quickly to the comparison between claiming low ability and claiming a lack of effort. We saw those different patterns emerge with teachers versus peers.
Yes. The reluctance to tell teachers about a lack of effort is pretty clear. Nobody wants to be seen as lazy or unmotivated by someone who's evaluating them, right?
Right. Obvious downside there.
But with peers, admitting you didn't try might actually serve a few purposes. For one, it could convey a sense of equality, like, hey, I'm not trying harder than you are, keeping things level.
Avoiding the try hard label.
Maybe, yeah. And it might also protect their perceived competence. If you failed but didn't really try, it kind of implies you could have succeeded if you'd wanted to.
Right, it's like a subtle way of saying this outcome isn't a true reflection of my abilities, preserving that underlying image of capability.
Exactly. It's a subtle message to peers that the failure wasn't due to a fundamental lack of underlying skill.
So ultimately, it seems like these face-saving tactics are often less about protecting the ego in isolation and more about nurturing those crucial social connections during adolescence. It's face-saving as relationship-saving in a way.
Precisely. That's a
Mm.
great way to put it. And it's interesting to think about when this all starts developmentally. The research touched on that, noting that younger children might not differentiate as much between public and private explanations.
Yeah.
The shift towards using low-ability explanations more frequently seems to happen around middle school, those grades we were talking about.
Which makes sense developmentally.
Yeah, it likely coincides with the increased importance of peer relationships and the more complex social hierarchies that develop during those years. It's all part of learning the intricate dance of social interaction as they navigate this really pivotal stage of life.
Absolutely. So to kind of wrap up this deep dive, the key takeaway for you listening is that early adolescents are incredibly strategic, really, in how they explain their failures, especially in academic settings. They understand, maybe implicitly, maybe explicitly, that different explanations, particularly attributing failure to low ability, can serve important social functions. It helps them gain approval from, like, teachers and peers, and just navigate the sometimes tricky social landscape of
This
adolescence.
really makes you think, though, doesn't it, about how these early social strategies might evolve as we get older.
Mm.
Consider how adults in the workplace or in, social circles might use similar tactics, perhaps downplaying their abilities in certain areas to build rapport, or maybe avoid appearing overly competitive.
Yeah.
What are the long-term implications of these learned behaviors, these ways of explaining our shortcomings? It's definitely something for you to mull over.
Indeed. And we encourage you, the listener, to reflect on your own experiences or observations. Have you noticed people strategically explaining their failures in ways that seem designed to elicit a specific social response? It's a fascinating lens through which to view our interactions, even now as adults. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those insightful questions coming.